It's great to have you all on the line tonight. I'm Paul Costello. I'm the director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, but more to the point, I'm the chair of the local recovery and community solutions working group of the task force, the Governor's Recovery Task Force. And I'm welcoming you all to the Franklin County Forum. This is the first county-wide forum that we've put together. So we're trying out new technologies. We're trying out a strong agenda. We've worked with a great steering committee of local leaders to frame an agenda, to dig in forums around topics that are of pertinence to the future of recovery and resilience in Franklin County. And we're deeply honored to have you all with us. I'm going to turn it to the administrative liaison from the Agency of Commerce, Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Housing and Community Affairs, to share some welcoming reflections from the administration. Josh.
Thanks, Paul. Good evening, everyone. As Paul said, I'm Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development, and the liaison for the Local Solutions and Community Action Team, which is part of the Governor's larger Economic Recovery and Mitigation Task Force. And on behalf of the Agency of Commerce, Community Development, and the Governor, just want to really thank everyone for coming out tonight and participating in this virtual forum. This is, you know, new way of doing business for all of us. And thanks for coming out on such a nice evening. And you know what I just want to say real briefly is that in many ways we're struggling with finding a way to say that we're in recovery already with this pandemic. You know, we know there's still a lot of response going on. But we need to start planning for that recovery. And we all know that recovery starts local, and that, you know, that's what we're here to talk to you about, learn from folks in the county about how to best plan for that recovery in Franklin County and build on what's already been started and share what your successes are as we go on this summer and fall with other regions of the state. So just thanks for coming out tonight and participating, and also for all the other team members from the Local Solutions and Community Action Team on this this call. You know, thanks for all your work and the heavy lift here. So thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Josh. The Governor, when he structured his recovery effort, he had one group that was really looking at the immediate financial needs of businesses for its recovery. He had another group that was really looking at the feathering process of reopening businesses, at the protocols for the first stages of recovery. And then he had our group, which was really looking, I think he recognized that all solutions aren't going to come from Washington, D.C., or from the monies that may come from Washington, D.C., that recovery isn't just going to come from Montpelier, that it comes town to town, it comes from community groups, it comes from people who put themselves on the line for their communities. And there's an enormous power in trying to add up some of that energy, some of those stories. And when you think about all the work that's being done, probably all of you are engaged in one way or another. All the work that's being done in Franklin County and the other counties in Vermont, we need to learn from each other. So he really turned to us to say, let's look at best practices and models that are going on in different communities that could be shared, that we could mutually educate and encourage ourselves. So when we think about the way that we're using these county-wide forums, we really have a few primary purposes. We want to hear from local folks about the challenges that they're facing. We want to share some best practices in the topic areas that the county wants to explore, and those are the 4 areas that Jenna will go through in a minute. We want to share what other places have done, but we also want to learn what you're doing, what creative ideas have emerged in your community and in Franklin County that we could then take on the road to Brattleboro and Rutland County and other places around the state as they struggle with how they're going to move forward. We also want to be sure, as we reach out to Vermonters in this age of deep challenge to us, and that challenge goes everywhere from the health challenge to the economic challenge to the challenge of how we work together in unity as a people, that we listen to people, that everyone is infinitely valuable as a Vermonter for our future. And that means we want to listen to people and all listen to each other. And so bear with us through this process. Let's pay attention to what each of us has to say. And let's especially reach out and understand that the COVID crisis has hurt some of us worse than others, people who are most challenged, people who have been historically marginalized in our communities. And this is a time to look more deeply at these issues and see how we partner together to make progress. So that's a second thing. We also are going to be listening hard. We have a great resource team with us tonight that's going to be in each of these separate focus forums. And they're going to be thinking through what's going on in the conversation to think about ways that they may be able to help, how they could potentially provide technical assistance, what potential funding resources may be available. We're not going to build a big strategic plan for Franklin County tonight, but we may find some nuts and bolts of work that can follow this call and where we can build connections to help people in the county move forward. Finally, all of these conversations are going to be an incredible window into the heart and soul of Vermont. And we're deeply excited about hearing what Franklin County is doing. And then as we go to the next counties, as we move around the state, what are the fundamental issues that are ongoing challenges, barriers, and opportunities that we can be then sharing with the governor and the administration and legislators and other policymakers to help the state step up and meet you all halfway and help build something bigger than we can do if we're all in our own corners. So it's an awesome opportunity for us. Deeply appreciate everyone being on the phone with us. And I'm going to turn to Jenna Kolosky, who's the Vcrd Community Programs Manager, and who's going to walk us through the agenda and gear us up for our breakouts. Jenna?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being on the call. So we have to head over into our breakouts now, but we really want to take some time to just walk through how to get there, because as Paul said, this and Josh, this is a new way of interacting for us. We'd really prefer to be with you all in person, but this is the way we figured that we could all connect, and I want to walk through how to do it. So the schedule for this evening, in just a second here, we're going to head into our breakouts. I want to thank the steering committee of regional leaders and representatives that came together to help identify the topics for the breakout discussions and the issues that are most important to address in Franklin County today. So our topics are supporting municipalities in recovery, overcoming isolation and building community connection, advancing telecommunications access and affordability, and supporting Franklin County businesses. And in each of those breakouts, you'll have a facilitator to guide the discussion. We have a series of questions we want to walk through to collect input and to facilitate the sharing of ideas and strategies. But we're also going to have some time for folks on the visiting team to share some recovery strategies that they're implementing in their region. And then at the end, to reflect on the conversation and share some potential resources and ways that they or others might be able to support the work in Franklin County.
It might be nice for us to do a round of introductions. In particular, it'd be helpful for me to sort of get a sense. I know we've got visiting team members here as well as members of the community. And so if you just want to say your name and your town, and if you have some sort of position, you could say that as well. And let me start out. I'm John Copans. I am a program director at the Council on Rural Development. So we're working, as Paul Costello described, we're working with the local and community response task force to help put these meetings together. So, and maybe I'll call on people to introduce, because that can be helpful to move things along. So Maura, how about you?
Sure. My name is Maura Carroll, and I'm the executive director of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And I'm delighted to be here, looking forward to what people have to say about how we provide the best assistance to municipalities.
Great. Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Dimitruk with Northwest Regional Planning Commission, and I'm a member of the Local Community Action Team.
Thank you. Jacob.
Hi, I'm Jacob Hemrick. I'm with the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Thank you. Sean?
Hi, I'm Sean Coleman. I'm a senior planner with Northwest Regional Planning Commission, and I'm your scribe for the evening.
Ooh, you have a big responsibility. Matthew.
Hi, my name's Matthew Miner. I'm the Director of Finance for the Village of Venusburg Falls.
Excellent. Wendy.
I'm Wendy Howard. I sit on the board of Notch, and I also am a lister for the town of Montgomery at the moment, and just interested in what's happening here.
Excellent. Thank you. And just joining us, I see, with a fabulous background there is our Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Commerce, Ted Brady. Ted, you want to just say a quick hello, introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Ted Brady. I work at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development with Jacob, and do all things kind of community economic development, housing, tourism related. So it's great to be with you. Oh, and apparently in charge of how the economy reopens. So just a little thing like that.
Just a minor detail like that. So,
yeah.
Well, it's great to have everybody here. Ted, we just did a quick round of introductions. We're a small enough group that it felt like we could do that. So I am the facilitator for this conversation, and I just want to set the stage a little bit as we get going here. You know, this is really, I would say, a listening session for us. This is about gathering sort of the feedback, the ideas, the best practices that are going on around the state of Vermont. You know, we're at a moment, I think it's the fact that we are in this really strange venue, looking at screens, many of us at our homes right now, is just emblematic of both that it's a really strange time, but it's also a really challenging time. It's a challenging time at the individual level. It's a challenging time at the family level. It's a challenging time sort of across our economy and in many social ways as well. And I think what we are experiencing in that is that many of us think about how can we be most sort of powerfully effective locally in responding to these challenges. We sort of revert in a positive way back to the realms that we really have the most control over. That might be our household, and that's really our communities and our neighborhoods. And so I would say the focus of this task force is really thinking about how are we most effective at that community scale of work, and then how do we share and empower and strengthen that work across Vermont communities in a way that really adds up to the strongest sort of response and recovery we can have at a statewide level. And really, that's, I think, what these conversations are about. And this isn't about sort of a sugar-coated version of things. It's about grappling with some tough issues. And boy, this topic in particular, I know, well, look, all the topics have some real challenges, but it's about really confronting some of those challenges and learning from them and sharing them and really adding it up. This local and community action team is very much sort of informing the work that the agency is doing, that the governor is doing, as they figure out how can they partner with communities in response and recovery. So just to give you a quick sense of how this conversation is going to structure, we have until 8:10, right? And Jacob, I'm looking to you and or anyone else to keep me on task, keep us on task in terms of getting back to the full group at 8:10. So we are going to quickly we're going to hear from Maura Carroll at the top to just share some practices that she's seen from other communities and what's going on at the town level. And then we're going to sort of open up the conversation. We're going to talk about what do we want for our communities in this area of supporting municipalities, what's holding us back from achieving those priorities. Are there promising practices, strategies, and programs emerging in this area and in Franklin County as a whole? And then what are some ideas for additional actions that are still needed, both at the local level and the state level? And I guess that's one other thing I want to note before I turn it over to Maura, is that on one hand, this conversation, we are having these in all 14 counties of the state. and it's adding up to a statewide sort of thinking. But I think also there's the potential for these conversations to spark local and regional action as well. I mean, we're a little bit of a smaller group tonight, but there was a pretty big crowd when we were in that full room. And it might be that some of the ideas that you all hear tonight are things that you want to act on. You know, you've got Catherine here from the Regional Planning Commission. You all have some agency and some power in your community. So this isn't just about sort of looking towards the state. It's also thinking about what are some opportunities for you all as well. And Sean pointed it out, but Sean is a scribe for tonight. So like, we're taking notes on all of these conversations. Know that the chat is a way for us. Also, we will gather the chat. I don't know if folks know, but you can, at any time, you can type in comments. We're also doing an online survey in each region as part of this. So we're sort of gathering input from as many angles as we can as we do this work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maura to give a little sort of presentation about some work happening at VLCT and in towns across the state. So Maura, it's all you.
Great, thank you, John, and thank you everybody for joining this discussion. I'm not sure that I'm going to be sharing things that you don't already know because you're already very involved in all of this, but when I received this assignment, I looked at it from the perspective of municipalities really tried from the get-go to look at things from the perspective of how are we going to manage through this and what will it look like when we come out the other side. So I've sort of grouped this into a preparation, obstacles and opportunities, and then some creative things that some communities have done. So I think we all know that initially when municipalities were confronted with the emergency, they really responded with very practical operational decisions. So most communities closed their doors right away and continue to remain closed for the most part, with the exception that some have opened with very specific rules and regulations about how they operate. They have limited hours of opening, they have mask requirements, they have distancing requirements. In some cases, they have limitations on how many people can be in the building at the same time. So they're really trying to continue to be practical about all of this. Communities also have tried very hard to keep residents and businesses informed about what's happening. And you can see that if you look at the variety of websites that municipalities have put together, they've simply tried to over communicate in every circumstance. And we applaud them for doing that because nobody can do anything without information. So we think they've really tried to provide that. Several communities have actually offered email addresses where people could volunteer to work in the community or could send in a request for assistance. And often volunteers were managing those emails, and they were managing how to disperse some volunteer activities. There's been an increased use of drop boxes, which is very practical when people are trying to renew dog licenses and get documents to town and city hall. And that has prevented the need to actually open up the building when it was not safe to do so, and also avoids people, if they are out and about, having to actually mail a document. They can just drop it off. We've also seen municipalities trying to lower expectations of their residents. And that may sound negative, but I think what it is trying to recognize how practical it is that with the world we're living in, we can't do everything that we used to do. And that may be temporary, but it also saves money because most municipalities have identified that they are going to have revenue shortfalls. So South Burlington, for example, was saving $40,000 a pay period because they had furloughed several employees. And so they had to tell the community, well, we can't provide the same level of service because we don't have those employees on tap. But it also, because of the federal money, kept people relatively whole during those furloughs, and that was also good for the community. In terms of some obstacles and opportunities, when communities started to reopen, they had a hard time actually getting staff to come back because at the time, childcare wasn't available. So it was a struggle to start doing the things that residents expected, but not being able to do it in the same way. So they continued to operate remotely in the best way that they could. Communities have had to meet virtually, like everybody in the world these days, meeting virtually. And that was very difficult in the beginning for municipalities because they weren't used to having to use that much technology. And in some areas of the state, it was a struggle because they didn't have good internet access. They didn't have access to good Wi-Fi. And so they were not able to connect with their residents in the same way. Now, what we're hearing is there are some smaller communities that are meeting in person, not many, but some. But even those that are planning to reopen and hold some meetings in person are saying they still want to offer the virtual option because it does offer people the opportunity to participate in ways they couldn't before. So there are a number of communities that will continue that. The downside of all of this is that as municipalities have become used to the virtual option, when the governor lifts the executive order, the emergency order, municipalities will at the very least have to have someone in a physical location that is able to have people come in and attend a meeting in person, even if it's really a virtual meeting. There will have to be a physical location. And as we understand it, and thank you, Ted, for that information, we are not going to be having that executive order or the emergency order lifted right away. So that's helpful in planning locally. In the midst of all of this as well, we have social unrest and the call for municipalities to address racial equity and policing. And that's a real challenge when folks are just trying to operate on a day-to-day basis. And some communities have faced some significant issues with that. Communities are also attempting to help residents and businesses to understand what the community can and can't do. We had one municipality that was approached by businesses saying, I don't understand why you're not giving us grants and why you're not helping us to come back online. Well, municipalities were not receiving any funding. And so they were not in a position to be offering grants or to be doing anything other than helping businesses find other resources, which is what happened in this particular community. They laid out all kinds of resources that were part of the SBA and the chambers and the like. And then there was the financial issue that I sort of mentioned, but cities and towns at the very end of the legislative session were granted $13 million as part of the $1.25 billion that was received in CARES Act money. It's not a criticism, but the amount, and we are receiving $2.7 million in money that's available for communities through the treasurer's office to pay the interest on loans that they've had to borrow to pay the state education fund. Now, there are a lot of needs as we go through this process, but Secretary Mnuchin had said to states, it would be good if you shared 45% of the money you're receiving in the CARES Act with your municipalities. And essentially, municipalities here are getting a little more than 1%. So we understand those challenges, but we also are working on another end to try and get direct funding from the feds for cities and towns. So we're hopeful that that may happen. And I'll just talk a little bit about some of the creative activity, which is the fun stuff that we've seen people doing. South Burlington has a night out and about with food trucks that are rotating around certain not state parks, but local parks during July. And it replaced what they had previously had as a South Burlington summer food truck and music series, which they had to cancel. Woodstock has on its website their 5 favorite social distancing activities, and they offer social distancing guidelines for each of those activities. Now, there wouldn't be any surprise in what they are. It's golfing and fly fishing, mountain biking, hiking, and bird watching, and horseback riding. But they also have a blog that talks further about what things people can do around the community and how to do it safely. And Stowe, I don't know if any of you have seen this, but on the front page of their website, they have what they're calling the Stowe Promise. And it is promoting health and safety, upholding community values, supporting local economic recovery, and practicing respectful civic participation. It's a great little document, and I would encourage people to take a look at it. In Montpelier, they suspended the use of parking meters and parking enforcement for those meters to encourage people to come downtown. And they put on their website all of the restaurants that are open and what services they're providing, whether there's in-house dining, takeout, delivery, curbside pickup, whatever. They've also listed all the retail establishments that are open. And they have on their website a whole timeline of COVID and how the resources connect with that timeline. I'll wrap that up, yes.
Wrap it up, yeah. Let's hear about Brattleboro, though. I'm a Brattleboro guy, so I want to hear about it.
There's 2 things, Brattleboro and a fun thing that Bethel does. Brattleboro has a Brattleboro Library Festival. And this year they're having a virtual literary cocktail hour next week with mystery writers attending, including Vermont's own Archer Mayer. So I thought that was really kind of a fun thing they're doing for the community. And Bethel, many of you know Rebecca Sanborn Stone and know about Bethel Strong, which is a community, volunteer community program. And they are also on the Bethel website. Well, they have one category that they call Some Good News. And it's just a compilation of good things and happy things that are happening in the town. And I just think it's an uplifting thing and simple thing to do if you have somebody to help you with your website. So I'm sorry I went on, but thank you for your patience.
Don't apologize, Maura. There is a lot to cover here. And to me, that gives a nice sense of the breadth of the topic. I want to, I think, shift quickly to hearing from you all as we think about this. And so, I mean, what we hear with the municipality is a lot of categories of work and challenge. There's the fiscal challenge. There is the governance challenge of how do you do your job in a time of social distancing? How do you engage the public in a time like this? There's sort of the expectation and services challenge that we see, which is we are in a moment where people are looking to government to do things that maybe wasn't expected at other times. At the same time, we're having some pretty intense conversations about things that people maybe don't want their municipal government to do, given the sort of conversations around policing that's going on around the state as well. So with that as a backdrop, what do we want for our communities in this? Like, if there was an ideal in terms of what our municipalities had right now as they face this myriad of challenges, what do we want for our municipalities? And let me just say, we're a small enough group that I think if you want to speak, just go ahead and unmute yourself and go for it. I think we can manage things that way. rather than having to raise hands or anything like that. If it gets too unwieldy, maybe I'll shift gears. So Matthew, I'm going to put you on the spot, right? Your position, did you say Enosburg Falls?
Yes,
And I feel like you maybe had a financial position there. Is that right? Or
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So just, I guess, give us a snapshot of what you're dealing with right now and what you feel like Enosburg Falls really is in need of in terms of support at this point.
I'm happy to say that Enosburg has been very, very, very fortunate during this pandemic. The direct impacts on our community have been, I think, far less devastating than some of our neighbors. For instance, we haven't yet experienced any significant fiscal pinch from this, largely due to the fact that we do our property taxes once annually. And those bills generally go out in August and are due in October. So we haven't seen that impact yet of people being unable to make their property tax payments. We're trying to do our best to anticipate where things are going to be for people by the time we get to October, and whether or not that's still going to have a large impact on us or minimal. We're certainly prepared for some tax anticipation borrowing as we discover what those actual payments are going to come in like. We also operate a utility, an electric utility, and water and wastewater in our village. We have suffered a little bit from the moratorium on disconnections with utilities. So we have some customers who are, at this point, are running up past due balances in the order of 3 and 4 or even 5 months. But I will say that that's a relatively small segment of our customer base. I think that the vast majority of our customers have been very diligent in keeping up with their utility responsibilities with the support of the unemployment supplemental payments and the federal stimulus payments that they've been receiving. So again, there's a little impact there from a cash flow perspective, but that hasn't been tremendous for us. We don't have any kind of a local sales tax component, so we haven't necessarily suffered directly from a revenue perspective for those businesses that have had to close. But we are very concerned about the health and well-being of several of our small businesses in the community as they're trying to get back on their feet, and whether or not they're really going to be able to maintain in the long term the local job market that we rely so heavily on. So I think that in reality, probably the biggest exposure we have is that ongoing health of our local small businesses. I was a little bit torn today as to whether to join this session or to join the breakout session on supporting small business. I'm kind of glad I did come to this one. I think that in terms of the service delivery options and governance issues, again, we've been fairly fortunate. We don't have a tremendous amount of in-person interaction at a governmental level in the community. So it generally our local meetings aren't heavily attended in person. And those folks that are fairly regular participants haven't had an issue with continuing to connect on a virtual level. Our village has good broadband service within the village limits, so that hasn't been a major issue. But for our town municipality, they've suffered a lot more with folks not having the internet access that have been required for them to keep connections for these virtual gatherings. So we've been fairly active in trying to monitor that need in the community as well. And again, because we're an electric utility, we're actually working on that in several different directions. It's nice to see Catherine here. There was discussion yesterday about the possibility of a communications union district in our area. And we're trying to get that in front of our local municipal governance to see if we can get adoption of a resolution for that, so that we can combine that with our other efforts in terms of building out fiber in the region with our utility distribution network. So we feel like we're well positioned to try and address that need for a rural community. So again, I think that it's had less of an impact on Enosburg certainly than a lot of communities, but we're trying to stay well informed so that we can be prepared for those issues that are coming down the pike. I think the next 3 and 4 months are going to be far more challenging for us than the last 3 or 4 months have been.
Yeah, that's one, this crisis came on fast, and the sense of what the timeline is and that uncertainty, right, about what the horizon looks like. And it's, I think that it is dawning on us all, right? We're in this for the long haul. I want to give a chance. As we did introductions, I sort of skipped over. We have Northwest Cable Access with us, who is recording each of these sessions so that people who aren't able to be on are able to watch them. And I do want to give, we've got a volunteer behind that black screen who maybe wants to just say hi, or I want to invite them, to introduce themselves, but also to participate in this conversation. So do you want to quick say hello and participate as you want?
Hi, yeah, I'm Caleb and I'm with Northwest Access TV. I'm here to just record and monitor everything. But yeah, maybe I'll jump in if I have a thought or whatever. I'm pretty interested in what you guys are talking about so far, so.
Well, thanks, Caleb. We really appreciate your ability to sort of do this, and it's such a service you provide. And please do chime in as we have this conversation.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm sort of I'm doing this in a little more of a facilitated way. Normally the way we structure these conversations is that we sort of invite our visiting team, and we have a lot of visiting team members here, to kind of hold their tongue and not to be as active in the conversation because we're in listening mode. But I feel like we're a small enough group that I want to just sort of empower all of us. Let's make this just a dialogue about things as opposed to trying to be too structured about things. We're small enough that I can sort of let loose some of the general guidelines around facilitation. Wendy, I don't know if you have a perspective, like as we think about sort of your community and what, on the municipal front, what do you feel like its needs are at this moment, and who can be helpful with those needs? Wendy, hold on. I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, I think.
How's
you got
that?
It. There you are. All right, there you go.
I mean, I'm in the lister's office, and at first it was a bit difficult to be in there. There's 3 of us, not 2. And we all sort of thought we were breaking the rules. It's a small office, but everybody got used to that. The select board chair, the select men and women are doing a great job, I think, of trying to keep the peace around town. I mean, Montgomery's got kind of this divided community in general, as far as following rules and that sort of thing. So that's an interesting dynamic during this pandemic. That faction that doesn't think it's necessary, and then the faction that absolutely thinks it's necessary. So it's been a bit tough the past few weeks having a lot of visitors in Montgomery from out of state. So that was sort of a new challenge too. I think for us that live here, we've talked about it a lot. Oh no, we're being invaded. How are we going to manage this? And but it seems to be okay. It was a challenge for our restaurants and inns. Of course, there are quite a few for a small town, but they seem to be pretty innovative and have done a lot of takeout service. The community itself tries to support those businesses. although I don't really have an inkling how they're doing financially, really. I mean, I'm only seeing it from the outside and from being a customer. I'm trying to think. I don't know if I'm the right person for, to tell you what's going on. I was just really curious about this discussion. So, and then we had a Notch board meeting last night. So Pam Parsons encouraged us to participate in some way, and Richford, with the Richford store and the collaboration around keeping that business going has been really amazing to me. So that was definitely resources and community coming together to keep that market open in Richford. And, Montgomery's kind of stuck in the middle. So we use Enosburg, for resources, Richford for resources. So I don't know. I was just really curious.
And can you remind, for those who don't know, tell us what Notch is?
Notch is Northern Tier Center for Health, the Northern Tier Centers for Health. And I believe there's 6 of them now. The original one in Richford, of course. And I'm new on the board. I've been there about a year. So that's a whole other learning experience. I'm a bit sad in Montgomery that the rec center hasn't really participated much in encouraging. I mean, we have a tennis court, so it's kind of like this broad encouragement to use the facility, but they haven't really stepped in to manage things much, or make I don't know, more suggestions.
Yeah, when you say manage,
put more suggestions out there.
Okay.
So I mean, everybody knows there's a bike path, everybody knows there's tennis courts, but it'd be kind of fun to kind of advertise that a little bit more, I think. Not that I'm going to take the reins.
But be a little more proactive in sort of curating and suggesting those types of activities for the community. Like the Montgomery version of what we heard about in Woodstock, which is, hey, here's some things you can be doing. And
we do have a newsletter. So I was thinking the next time we're asked to add things to the newsletter that maybe I could, sometimes I belong to the community garden, so I could put a blurb out there about other activities besides just gardening or something like that, just as a community member.
You mentioned sort of Montgomery and some of the, I guess, the divide, and I think we all experience that divide. And I wonder, like, to me, that's one of the things I've observed is I think our municipal officials have been thrust into a position that's pretty darn challenging. I mean, so are our state officials, like, let's be clear, like, but all of a sudden we have municipal officials being sort of almost forced to take positions on health things and set local ground rules for something that maybe we would prefer be set at a state or even a federal level. And so that's a prompt for you all. Like, what do you think about that? Do you feel like there's been enough clarity at the state level that the municipalities can sort of tuck in and follow that guidance, or do you wish there was more in some circumstances?
Well, before I mute myself, I'm really impressed with the state guidance. And I know that in Montgomery, just from hearing conversation in the office, that they're definitely using that guidance to direct them for sure.
That's great.
I would mirror Wendy's comments on that. I've been very impressed with the level of support that we've gotten from the state in terms of interpreting guidelines and setting safe practices, guidance on how to get staff back to work safely and how to protect the community. And we're seeing pretty good support at the community level for most of those expectations. It depends a little bit on what setting you're in, but you go out and you do your interactions in the community, and a vast majority of people are being respectful of distancing and mask use. And I think that the amount of information that's been spread around at the state and local level has really made that much better than it would have been.
That's great. That is solid, solid feedback. That's really, I think, important to hear. So I want to sort of pause a second and just kind of remind folks about the sort of other agenda items as we think about this, the rest of this conversation. I think we're kind of at a point of shifting and thinking about, are there some promising practices or strategies or programs that are emerging? And you described this a little bit, like I heard you say it, Wendy, when you talked about some of the restaurants in Montgomery. I would say let's be open. You know, in theory, this conversation is about the municipality. And whenever somebody uses the word municipality, I think they're sort of signaling that it's the formal town government. But I guess what I would like to do is frame it up more broadly and talk about sort of town level, whether it's businesses in town or community organizations in town. Many community organizations really just came together in response to this crisis. So I guess that's a question for really all of us. Like, what are some of the promising, I mean, you heard Maura describe some of those in her presentation, but like, what are some of the promising practices and strategies you're seeing, whether that's at the local level or the regional level, as people are responding to the crisis and shifting towards recovery?
Well, I would take a stab at that. So we recently created and filled a dedicated economic development and grant coordination position in Enosburg. It's been a tremendously good decision, I think, for our community. It was very timely, too, in terms of when that individual started. And he had the opportunity to develop a dedicated website for economic development for the community. And he immediately was able to get up a dedicated page that listed local businesses, their statuses, who was closed, who was operating under restrictions, what kind of modified services and hours they were offering. And that, I think, helped the community be more aware of where they could go and find what they needed to find. We also have a pretty good group of folks in our recreation committee and recreation department, and there have been a number of virtual programs that they've developed to keep. It was probably about 8 months ago that we opened a community center in the center of the village, and they immediately were able to transition a lot of that programming to virtual programming. So as they had just begun to start to build a following in the community for some of that programming, they've done a nice job of not losing that momentum. Again, we were fortunate, I think, to have some good skill set in the local community with regard to technology so that we could have the support to get some of those programs out to folks virtually. And I'm not sure that all communities have been as fortunate having, you know, somebody to support them with the technology requirements to make those things available. So I suspect that that's an area where a lot of communities could benefit with equipment and training and resources in terms of how to connect to folks virtually and keep them active and involved in their community.
I'd muted myself, hadn't I? That's great. Thank you, Matthew. That's some good, clear. Those are some clear suggestions. Others, as we think about some promising practices and strategies that you're seeing, and that might be in your own community or other communities in the region or elsewhere.
I work part-time for the LEAPS program. That's the after-school program. And usually in the summer, they cooperate with the rec department and do a summer day camp that's really popular in Montgomery that services, 60 to 100 kids in the area. So that didn't happen this year, but the LEAPS program is able to sponsor a program for the month of July. They felt confident having kids there 2 days a week for the month of July. And then the other 3 days, they have a virtual schedule for things that the kids can do at home. So I run the garden up at school. So I do like this garden tour on Mondays so that the kids can watch it at home, and then they can go with their counselors on Tuesdays into the garden. But so, I mean, that program's been really innovative. I think it's tough with the kids. Not many kids are participating. I believe they're 13, and they were able to take 20. So participation, parents and kids deciding to participate even in school in the fall is going to be interesting to see. And, you know, how can you entice, if that's what we want to do, how can we entice kids and families to let their kids participate? It'll be interesting, I'm sure, in all communities all over the state, to see who's actually, I mean, we have a faction in Montgomery who won't send their kids if they have to wear masks. So there's two different reasons for not sending. Yeah. You know, not thinking they need to be protected, and the other faction of thinking that they won't be protected enough. So it'll be really interesting to see. I don't know what the solution is, but yeah, I can anticipate that for sure. So.
Yes, this, you know, schools are another example of public officials that have been thrust into some really challenging sets of decisions, and with a fair amount of uncertainty. Matthew, do I see you?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that our community has definitely got a significant divide as well. There is that faction that is rather dismissive of the current circumstances. We've been very fortunate in this area with not a lot of confirmed cases, and there's not been as much personal impact from the pandemic, and it's caused some people to feel like all of these cautions have been overkill, and why can't I get my life back to normal? And then there are those folks that you know, are genuinely concerned. Maybe they have someone at home that's an at-risk individual, and they want to ensure that those protections are in place. They're really good at following those guidances. There seems to be a strong polarity in the community about whether or not this is enough is being done or too much is being done.
Good feedback. Others have some strategies or practices you've observed that you feel like are worth sharing?
I have one. We had an election Tuesday, a bond vote in Montgomery. And so, of course, folks could get an absentee ballot and vote by mail. But as a JP, I worked in the mornings at the polls. So we actually opened the polls in the bays of the firehouse. So the firehouse is very open, you know, it was like almost being outside, but luckily we weren't in the sun. And that seemed to work really well. I mean, we had our protective gear. We had protective gear for folks who came that had forgotten them. And I think in the morning there were 3 people that had forgotten their masks, but otherwise the community was really cooperative. We had over 300 voters come in vote, and a couple hundred and more, a few more than that, actually come to the firehouse to vote. And I think it gives people a sense of purpose to actually do something physical like that if we can do it safely. So that it was kind of interesting, worth mentioning, I think.
For sure, yeah. We're facing a couple of elections here in August and November. So I know a lot of municipal officials are spending time thinking.
And it passed.
And it passed, hey.
It passed, not by much. I mean, what a crazy time to have a bond vote for $18 million, right? Whoa. I mean, we won't be paying that, but it's a big one.
John, I just wanted to add that I've been really impressed at the number of organizations and people generally who have offered resources for free, so that, you know, when you see state organizations and federal organizations, the National League of Cities, there are no direct member cities or towns in Vermont, but all their programming right now is free. And so folks can take advantage of what kind of resources are on their website. and certainly can go through us for some of that as well. But, you know, the work that the Collaborative Funders Group has done to bring people together and say, where's the need and what are we going to talk about this week? We talk about food, we talk about housing and all of that. And then the resource providers. I just think it's given a great deal of opportunity for people to understand where some of the needs are and to understand better what needs to be done. So, so I think that that's a really great thing. And you all, Ted and ACCD and the health department and state agencies have just been a real help to municipalities who have looked to you for guidance. And we don't have that background. We can't give them health information, and we can just try to send out the guidance you're giving with some practical suggestions. But so we appreciate all of that free access. ICMA as well, for those who are inclined to hear what practical things communities can do.
Now, John, I've watched a lot of creative, interesting, innovative things happen the last 3 or 4 months. Some of them good and some of them very troubling. But what I've been impressed with the municipalities that could have said no and didn't. So basically, when we shut this economy down, we put out guidelines that said, here's the confines you have to work in. A lot of people had to make the decision, well, this is just too complicated, so we can't do it. So we have to say no. And so they had to close town offices. They had to close libraries, they had all these things. But then there were these little bright spots where you saw, oh, there's an interesting idea. So I think it was the town manager the town clerk in either Jericho or Underhill, who I'm on the phone, they're asking some questions about travel restrictions. They're telling me about how they had a young couple that was coming to town from Seattle somewhere, and they wanted to get married, and they were going to quarantine for the 14 days. And she goes, how do I get them their marriage license? We want to do this. We want to give marriage licenses to people. And so they came up with a way to do drive-through marriage licenses, right? Which was just a genius idea. And they could have said no, but they chose not to. Or the town of Killington, the pool question. And there aren't many towns that have pools, but it's a really hard thing to manage a pool under the existing guidance. And the town put its shoulder to the stone and figured a way to say yes to opening their pool this summer within the guidelines. And it took volunteers, probably dozens if not hundreds of hours to come up with a plan and interpret the guidance and do their own research and then make that happen. And then for the 4th of July, the easy thing to do, and perhaps because of health and all sorts of reasons, was to cancel your fireworks and cancel your parade, right? But some towns found a way to have drive-in fireworks, which, that was just such a genius thing. And every town can't do it, obviously. They don't have the venue, or if they were the only one in their surrounding region to do it, they'd have a problem. But these places that found ways to say yes, and find volunteers willing to make sure it worked. I mean, I think in the town of Milton, they ended up doing drive-in fireworks, and they needed like dozens of volunteers compared to normal to make sure people were following the rules, and they found a way to do it. And then on the library front, for some time, it was just a hard no, you couldn't do anything. But the second there was a crack, so many libraries came forward and said, we're going to do virtual programming, and we're going to do curbside delivery and pickup. So I think when the governor, after the first month, right, the governor's like, I want to see some creativity. I want to see people find a way to offer services in the new restrictions. And it was, I think, inspiring to see people do it. So the moral of my story is I think we're in this for the foreseeable future, for the summer and for part of fall, if not further. So the whole point of why we're doing this, right, is to grab a few of those stories and do a few more of them and be creative. And to Maura's point, I think municipalities need some resources to do that. Jacob and I worked on this Better Places program, which was supposed to give you some resources to do some creative things like close down streets and open them to pedestrians and restaurants and things like that. If the state's not going to show up with that money, maybe it's worth the communities doing that themselves, or getting the private sector, enabling the private sector. That's another thing that was amazing, to watch some of these towns close streets or give their public space to private businesses. That was unheard of. Or how about sorry to keep going, my last one. How about liquor? So bars and liquor and alcohol have always been just a taboo subject. You don't touch liquor laws. Well, we made it, and I didn't hear a single complaint from a town on this, so that you could have an outdoor consumption permit by just filing a piece of paper with no reaction. And towns who ultimately get the yay or nay on that, I didn't hear a single complaint from a town saying, how dare you usurp this power from us? It's the creativity.
Yeah. Thanks, Ted. That's I think that's exactly what this conversation tonight is about. And I would say, to add to that, a lot of that work takes some new partnerships and new relationships. Like that's one of the things that I've observed, is that you get almost like strange bedfellows, new people building new connections because they're in a problem-solving mode where they know new circumstances and we have to do things differently. And who do we need to work with to meet the needs of our community? And whether it's food or taking care of our kids or so many different aspects to this, those new connections. One of the points of hope that I have is that those are going to serve us in a long-term way as a state, right? Those relationships have real value in an ongoing way. Others, there's a few of Jacob.
Well, yeah, one thing I was going to add, and it's been so great to see VLCT champion the Love My Community campaign and that placemaking element. And I think what we've seen a lot of communities do are really tackle placemaking, but through
Jacob, can you put your mic up a little?
Oh, yeah, but through ways, is that better? I'm sorry, Catherine. But through ways that really encourage the heart. So I live in Berry City, and there were banners put up downtown with every graduating senior with a picture of their face on and I like Wendy talking about youth programs. I think that's, thinking about who's really affected. It's all about people and who's really affected by this, and how do we encourage the heart, because we're all going through a tough time, but it's also a celebration of those connections we have, and where we are rooted in a place. So it's been great to see.
Thank you.
I know there's been a number of communities that did their graduation ceremonies with vehicle parades. And I think that was another creative solution to give that recognition that's so hard-earned for high school graduates.
My grandson graduated from Lamoille, and the best picture of him graduating is I'm sitting in the back seat of the car, and he's looking back with his mask that says, LUHS on it, and his graduation cap and whatever. So that's been really good. Another thing Montgomery did, the fire department has a chicken barbecue every summer, and so they did it to go. So they did a pre-order online, and everybody picked their chicken up on the 4th of July and took their chicken home. So good things happening.
Where was that, Wendy?
It was in Montgomery. They do a chicken barbecue, and so the fire trucks did a parade. They were crashed by certain political supporters, but and then they did their chicken just like they always do, spend all day cooking it, but it was a pre-order pickup instead of eating it on the rec center altogether. So it was very good, pretty innovative fire department.
Well, and you just think like the safest option is not to do it, right? Like for those who are really risk averse, like the safest thing is just, you know what, we're not going to do it this year. But you think about for people in Montgomery who really look forward to that chicken barbecue every year, like that little taste, yeah, you're not gathered around the same table, but that taste of sort of normalcy is so important. And I imagine all of the work it takes to do it differently. And what's powerful is to see so many people stepping up and doing that work.
That's actually a question that I had for both Wendy and Matthew is, in your communities, have you seen people step up and lead and take action that aren't the typical group? Or is it more the typical group just doing things differently?
More the typical group doing things in more creative ways. With a really small community, you don't see a lot of new faces on a regular basis.
I think in Montgomery, like the fire department's very active. Certain people who work in the municipal government, I mean, I've done a number of things, served on the select board, whatever. So you have that core group. I think individuals stepped up to do things like I teach a form of Tai Chi. So my class usually ends in the spring, but people didn't want to stop. So we went outside. And I think, so a lot of individuals are kind of, you know, doing different things in their bubbles or whatever you want to call it, that they still get together with. There's pickleball. So there's this certain group of people that does that. So I think because people are stepping up to be outside and be more active, that those individuals are taking a little bit more initiative than they might have in the past, like just take the summer off, but they want to keep a connection somehow. So you know, they've stepped up to do that. The community garden was flooded and somehow we got it going. So we're growing vegetables in river silt, but you know, so different people in that group too stepped up to get that job done because they really wanted to do it. So
in my work, that has been one area of, I would say, renewed focus is growing food here locally. And like whether it's participation in community gardens, brand new CSAs that are getting created in response to the need, or figuring out how to provide food to those who are having a hard time putting food on the table. That seems to be an area of real sort of responsiveness and engagement for folks. So how do we think, as we all look ahead, I think no one knows what the fall is going to bring. There's sort of worst case scenario, best case scenario. But as we think about sort of the length of this experience, the economic disruption of this, what are the additional actions that are still needed? Like, what do we need to be doing if we're in a tough fall where we actually have to ratchet back because we see a little bit of a resurgence of infection? What do we feel like are the additional actions that we're going to need? Or even in a recovery stance, let's say, what more can we be doing to sort of lift up and to bend that curve of economic sort of vitality and prosperity?
Well, I'd offer another example of something that's had a significant positive local impact, and that's the folks that manage the Vermont Bond Bank and the revolving loan fund took some very creative and innovative actions early on, and they agreed to waive interest on a number of the revolving loan fund payments for a period of 1 year. Just for Enosburg, that resulted in a $13,000 reduction in interest expense for the current fiscal year. There are other things that are going to come down the pike when it comes to the municipalities' fiscal responsibilities, that kind of creative thinking about ways to support or supplement or subsidize those payment requirements that municipalities have to help bridge that gap for revenue loss. Unfortunately, I'm not as intimately familiar at the town level of finances and the town's struggles with the education fund payments. They also operate on an annual tax payment pattern, so their payments are due about the same time that the village is. So, you know, they're coming around to that issue very soon, and will be at the same time that the village is. So, I think other ways that the municipality can be supported in terms of deferring or subsidizing payments in order to help bridge that revenue shortfall.
Is it true isn't there an opportunity to for municipalities to borrow money at either I don't know if it's a no interest, but with the state subsidizing the interest on those loans? I believe that's the case.
Yes,
In case they need tax relief.
well, it's primarily to cover borrowing that is needed to make sure money gets to the education fund.
Right.
But yes, the treasurer's office is offering assistance to cover those interest payments.
Well, Montgomery, and I think every town is really unique in that situation. Montgomery has an 18-month, we're switching our year. So we have an 18-month tax bill this year, one time, just happened to be this year. So, but I'm sure those in charge are working that out.
How about others? As we think about what actions we're going to need, whether that's at the local, regional, or statewide level, what are some other thoughts there? Caleb, I want to give you a chance too. You've been quiet there. I don't know. Do you have any sort of reflections or thoughts?
None that I can really chime in with at this point. I'm more of a fly on the wall for this, but
what town are you in, if you don't mind me asking, and sort of what have you experienced there in terms of the town response?
I'm in St. Albans, and I think a lot of the businesses here have, you know, been following guidelines, which is great and all that. And I've seen a few things with the creativity, like creative ways to go around and keep things going. I think a big thing that I've seen is the schools around here have been more online focused. I have a brother in college right now, and he's it was a weird shift for him moving out of St. Mike's and then moving back into the house and starting to just be all online, and it was very sudden. Yeah, sorry, I'm not great at public speaking.
No, you're doing great. I put you on the spot. That's some great suggestions and feedback.
Yeah, I mean, as far as things go with other regions, I lived in New York for a while in New York City, and that I just had moved back very recently. I'm from St. Albans, and have lived here most of my life. But things I've seen there that have been pretty inspiring is a lot of the museums have kept things going. Like they've put their exhibits online and come up with new and exciting ways to like showcase that kind of stuff. And I think it's kind of the same thing schools are doing and preparing to do. I was subbing a lot, and I have spoken to a lot of teachers, and I've been hearing like different plans of what is going on in the fall, like if kids are coming back or what's happening. It's inspiring to see these people like shift their entire work life into a different kind of thing, and then like just keep rolling with the punches, I think.
Mhm. Thanks, Caleb. We're at a point, probably about a little more than 10 minutes left, and I want what we traditionally do. We've had a little bit of it here already, but what we traditionally do at this point is we turn it over back to our visiting team to provide some big picture reflections on what they've heard, but I think also what they're seeing and where they see as needs and opportunities moving forward. So I think if it seems okay to folks, I think we will shift to that that sort of round robin of reflections. But maybe before we do that, I want to sort of give Wendy and Matthew and Caleb any other sort of thoughts or reflections at this point in terms of what our future direction should be and where there are some opportunities and needs.
I don't have anything new to add at this point.
Well, thank you. All right, let me. I'm going to go round the circle again, starting with Maura, and then Catherine, Jacob, Sean, and we'll let Ted wrap it up. But it'd be great to just hear a few reflections here as we bring things to a close here. So, Maura.
Well, I think what I've heard around the room, if you will, is just we need to continue to be creative. We need to think outside the box and just find ways to move forward. It may be hard, but you know what? You just keep at it. And involving as many people in the process as we can also makes lighter work, and it also brings further ideas to the table. So the idea of continuing to seek out new and different ways of doing things and staying encouraged during that process, and whatever that means, if you need to connect with folks in order to do that, or you need to step back and say, let me think about this on my own and come up with something. But really what I kept hearing was people are stepping up to the plate. There's still some factions, but continuing to work on it and do good things. It's clear that people have done some great stuff. So that's very encouraging.
Thanks, Maura. Catherine.
Sure. It was great to hear from you guys about some of the details going on in your communities that I wasn't as familiar with. So thanks for that. What comes to mind for me is more questions as we look ahead, thinking about how we can help plan to keep people and communities connected when the weather turns and outside options aren't as attractive. What can we do now to start thinking about that? What can we do now to help support a world where maybe municipal meetings aren't all virtual or aren't all in person, but are a combination of things? And what technologies do we need? What meeting spaces do we need? What equipment do we need in order to make that a seamless approach, both for the participants and the municipal government and community groups? And then I just think about looking ahead. I think, Matthew, you noted as well as Wendy that the next 3 to 6 months might actually be more challenging for both individuals and municipal governments than the past 3 months I've been. And how do we use what we've learned in the beginning of this to help us react more strongly and bounce back even more quickly over the next 3 to 6 months when we have these changes and challenges that hit us? So those are the questions that come to mind, and I'm really excited to be part of the Franklin County community and trying to figure the answers out.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Sean, you've been scribing away. What have you, any reflections you want to share?
I'll say, I know, obviously from regional planning standpoint, we're involved in a lot of different groups. And one of the things that's really come up, we've been meeting weekly, kind of a regional health collaborative, which is made up of different Vermont Department of Health, the Northwest Medical Center staff, what's left of the Rise Vermont program, and a few other Franklin County caring communities and other organizations. And a lot of the people that go to the meetings, everybody wears multiple hats for other, different food shelves or other organizations. And certainly the big concern is, we've had, the opioid crisis and the recovery, people trying to seek recovery from the drug addiction and alcohol problems. And a lot of those preventive programs have been cut, unfortunately. The hospital had a really successful Rise Vermont program that really promoted health and wellness for the communities. Unfortunately, with COVID, they were cut as well, and that program has been gutted. A lot of the communities now, especially with the world that we live in, people are getting outside, it seems like, more and wanting to be more active because we're stuck at home, want to be inside as much. So I'm really hoping that the communities and the state and various agencies that are involved come up with some real creative ways to help get and fund get back some of these recovery dollars that were lost in some of the recovery programs that were lost. So definitely some concern about the overall community health of its residents, the residents. So.
Thanks, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob.
Well, I think two things that I heard, and one is that in Montgomery, that even with so much financial uncertainty, the voters gave support to a bond issue, and they're willing to invest. Saying we're going to continue to invest in the community in Enosburg Falls. That the finances have been steady so far, but that there's continued anxiety about the future and how important that is to keep those lines of communication open, like Maura said, and about what's going on and what the needs are. So thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. And Mr. Brady, Ted.
I've been impressed by the fact that towns have managed through it all with really very little technical assistance. I'm sure Maura and her team have been bending over backwards to answer questions, and the regional planning commissions have been doing incredible things. But in general, people have found a way through this and found a way to engage citizens and do online meetings and all these things. And it's been incredible. I'm also really nervous about the financial side. And I actually don't understand the financial side of municipal government and COVID-19. I don't think anybody does. In general, the government support systems that have been put in place should mitigate all of the potential impacts to a municipality, right? Unemployment insurance is paying people, in some cases, double their typical wages. The Paycheck Protection Program delivered $1.2 billion into Vermont's economy. Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program put another several $100 million back into the economy. And so you question how could we end up in a position where 10-20% of people don't make their property tax payments, right? It doesn't all add up to me. But yet we know on the housing side that about 10% of the people aren't making their mortgage and their rent payments. We know on the utility side that there's more than $50 million in utility arrearages outstanding, right? Right, Matthew? So I don't fully understand how we end up there, but I'm very nervous that it is going to be there. And if we have another 3 to 4 months of this, I worry about the financial health of our municipalities and what it actually means. So all that said, there are these rays of sunshine and hope that I hope we don't ever go back away from. John, you put it really well, the connectivity of people, the people that I've had to call and talk to who I never have before, that I'm sure Matthew and Wendy, Catherine and Sean have done the same, talking to people that there's no reason you normally do in your typical day job, has really helped and built something that I hope lasts.
Thanks, Ted. I'll just provide a few quick reflections myself. I mean, to me, what the theme that I hear from all of this is just that the pivot that all of us, in so many different ways, we've had to make this pivot. Like we quickly were thrust into a new world, and and we've all had to adapt, right? That pivot and that adaptation. And at our best, we've seen our organizations and our municipalities leap into that adaptation, right? They've dove in and they've figured out in really creative ways how to solve problems and continue to sort of serve their residents and communities. And I think that's powerful. And I think, you know, to me, it's always a point of reflection. How are we a catalyst? How do we support those folks who are in that? You know, Ted mentions the Better Places program, a perfect example where you have people ready to solve problems, to make their communities more enticing, allow more retail. Like, so how can we be supporting those types of opportunities in communities where you have the community raising its hand and saying, we're ready, we want to be that partner? Where can the state and other partners meet and really help be that catalyst for that great work? So at this point, Jacob has pasted into the chat so we have actually, I've given you guys 5 minutes break. Which is kind of nice when you're talking about 2 hours of Zoom, but we're actually coming back together for a closing session, and it's a chance for you all to hear a little bit about what happened in the other breakout sessions. I have the challenge, and it is a challenge, of summarizing what we've talked about here. So that link for that closing session, it's actually, by the way, the same link that was your opening session. It's basically that same meeting. So I would encourage you all to make the jump over in the next 5 minutes here for the close. So, and really want to appreciate everybody. Our visiting team, can we just acknowledge these are folks who have been working so hard in response and in support in so many different ways. And for them to spend this time on a Thursday evening is really something else. So big, yeah, I see, nice hand there. Matthew, yeah, big round of applause for all of you for joining.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you all.